Hello and welcome to our biology class. Today we're going to learn about transport in plants. Now we know that plants and animals share common characteristics, and one of those characteristics that we have learned from the previous chapter is nutrition. In other words, in order for animals and plants to survive, they need to have the ability to obtain foods which contains the nutrients in order for it to live, to build itself, to grow, to develop, and repair. However, unlike animals, plants do not have that active organ that allows the pumping of the water and the nutrients all throughout the different parts of the plants. And therefore, if plants doesn't have the heart or the organ that transport actively all those nutrients all through the different parts of the plants, how does plants transport the necessary nutrients in order for it to survive? In this session, we're going to learn exactly how the plants are doing it. Let us first review that plants, in order for it to produce its food, requires the presence of water, which it obtains from the soil. It also requires carbon dioxide, which it obtains from the atmosphere. And when the water and carbon dioxide exist, photosynthesis happens. However, the chemical reactions won't just happen by itself without the presence of the sun. Solar energy allows the chemical reaction to happen between water and carbon dioxide. As a result of 6 water molecules reacting to 6 carbon dioxide molecules, glucose is produced plus 6 molecules of oxygen. Now, when glucose is produced, this is stored energy. Now remember, plants as a living organism also needs energy, but glucose is just stored energy. In other words, it needs to break down the glucose into its usable energy, and by means to do that is it requires the presence of oxygen. In other words, oxygen chemically reacts with glucose, and as a product, it releases water and carbon dioxide. And this process is what we call cellular respiration. As a cellular respiration, chemical energy is released in the form of heat. Now, there are 3 mechanisms involved in order for the nutrients, the minerals, and the water to be transported to different parts of the plants. But first, let us take a look on where does the water begins entering and where does the water exits. It all starts with the roots. Water enters to the root hairs, which have a large surface area to make water uptake easier. It then travels up to the stem, then to the leaves, where some water are being used for photosynthesis. Some of the water, however, are being evaporated because the leaf itself is exposed under the sun, and therefore water escapes through the small opening under the leaf, which we call the stoma. Now there are 3 mechanisms involved in this process. First is what we call osmosis, or the diffusion of water from higher concentration to the lower concentration, or higher water potential to lower water potential. We also call it concentration gradient. The difference in the concentration gradient of water from the soil and to the roots allows the diffusion of water, which we call osmosis. The second part is what we call the capillary reaction, which will be discussed in detail later on. The third part that exists on a leaf is what we call the transpiration, where water escapes by evaporation. Now the difference of water concentration on the leaf and the water concentration down here allows the movement of water up to the stem and to the leaf, which we call osmosis. Now let's take a closer look of what is happening on the leaf and how is it possible, and where does the water, mineral ions and other nutrients passes through. In the leaf, we will have a cuticle, which is a waxy substance that prevents water loss. Down the cuticle, we can see also the upper epidermis, which serves as an additional protective layer for the palisade mesophyll cells. Af Below the upper epidermis is the mesophyll layer, where it is composed of a palisade and spongy mesophyll cells. The palisade mesophyll cells is the elongated cell found right next to the upper epidermis, where most of the chloroplasts are found. Therefore, most of the photosynthesis happens in this region. Another layer of mesophyll cell is what we call the spongy mesophyll cells. It is spongy in order for allow the better circulation of gases such as oxygen and carbon dioxide. It is also allowing gas exchange in between mesophyll cells. Down the mesophyll cells is what they call the lower epidermis, where stoma is also found, or the opening. Xylem and phloem is responsible why the water, mineral nutrients, and even sucrose are being transported to different parts of the plants. And xylem and phloem thus are what we call the vascular bundle. The vascular bundle is the one responsible for the water uptake and of course the mineral ions as well. It is also responsible for the transport of the sucrose, which is sugar needed for the plants to build its own proteins for growth, for repair and development. Now, what's the difference between xylem and phloem? Xylem is allows one-way flow of water and minerals. It is also a combination of dead cells that are found inside the tube. Yes, you heard it right. That the xylem is a combination of dead cells piled on top of each other. And because it is a dead cell, it doesn't contain nucleus, and also it doesn't contain cytoplasm. Because of this, there is an opening in between the cells in order to allow water to flow easier from the root up to the leaf. Phloem, on the other hand, transports water and food from the leaf down to different parts of the plants. But unlike the xylem, the phloem have end walls with perforations in order to allow only select water and food molecules to be transported back and forth. Hence, it is being transported back and forth, it is a two-way flow. If we take a closer look of the xylem under the microscope, we can see that it is composed of dead cells. The transverse section of this suggests that the xylem is more on hexagonal in shape. Now, where can you find xylem and phloem in the roots, stems, and the leaves? Let us start with the stem. The stem is surrounded by xylem and phloem, but we should always remember that the xylem is always found inside and the phloem is always found outside on the rim. If we're going to take a slice of the stem, we will be able to see that this part here is what we call the xylem, and this part over here is what we call the phloem. Xylem allows one-way flow of water and mineral ions up from the roots up to the different parts of the plants, while phloem allows a transfer of food and water molecules from the leaf to different parts of the plants as necessary. If you're going to compare the location of xylem and phloem from the stem and the roots, it is quite different. And we can see that the roots also has root hairs. These root hairs, when seen under the microscope, looks like this, which is an equivalent of the villi found in our small intestine. These root hairs allows or it also allows greater surface area in order for the water to be absorbed in huge amount. Huge amount of water absorption equates to better photosynthesis that will take place in the plants. Now let's take a closer look of a hair cell. A hair cell is just like the typical cell, contains a cell wall, a cell membrane, the vacuole which stores the water, the nucleus which is the control center of the cell, the cytoplasm which suspends other organelles. But the only difference is that it contains the root hair, whereby it allows the expansion of the cytoplasm and the vacuole. The vacuole, remember, stores water and food as well. So the greater the vacuole, the greater is the storage capacity for the water. How does water gets inside of the root? Remember that the first process is what they call osmosis. How does this happen? The water present in the soil is greater than the water concentration present inside the root, which makes the water outside more dilute, and therefore we call that hypotonic. Hypotonic are dilute substances where the water potential is high. Since the water potential is high, it makes the inside as hypertonic, which is water potential is low. When this happens, the water moves from high water potential to low water potential, and it continues until it reaches the xylem here. This part here is what they call the epidermis, and therefore the hair cells are found in the epidermis layer. Next, the epidermis layer is the cortical cells. After the cortical cell is the endodermis, where it lies next to the xylem. But how does the xylem allows water easily to be transported from down up to the different parts of the plants? This mechanism is what we call the capillary action, where this capillary action involves two types of forces. The first force is what we call the adhesion. These are the forces that attracts between water molecules and the surface of the xylem cell wall. The second force is what they call the cohesion, where the water molecules attracts each other. Because of these forces, it creates a capillary action which allows the smooth flow of water from the roots up to the tube of the xylem vessel. When it reaches the leaf, some of this water are being used for photosynthesis. However, some of this water as well are lost through evaporation. The evaporation of the water is what they call transpiration. So transpiration happens for two reasons. Transpiration happens because the plant is exposed under the heat of the sun, thus allowing water vapor to escape. However, it can only escape the moment the stoma opens. The stoma opens when carbon dioxide is allowed to get inside. The moment carbon dioxide get inside, that's the only time that water vapor and oxygen is able to escape the leaf of the plant. And the moment it decides to close, water vapor and oxygen are trapped inside for further use. Now, what are the factors affecting the transpiration rate? We know that the greater the temperature, the greater the kinetic energy. So if the water that are found on the soil is warmer, relatively warmer, what happens is that the osmosis of water or diffusion of water from the roots up to the stems also becomes faster. The next factor is what we call the air movement. The release of water vapor are being carried out by the air. The faster the air, the faster is the water vapor being carried out outside of the plant. And therefore, the faster that the water vapor is being released, the bigger is the concentration gradient, and the faster is the rate of diffusion. Next is what they call the humidity. Humidity tells us how much water moisture are there in the atmosphere. And therefore, if there's a lot of water moisture in the atmosphere, the concentration gradient becomes less. The lesser the concentration gradient, the slower the rate of diffusion. Next is what we call the light intensity. The higher the light intensity, the greater is the transpiration process, because water vapor are being escaped out of the stoma of the leaf. Now, how is phloem exactly transporting water and food towards different parts of the plants? Now, there are two things that we have to bear in mind. The cells where foods are produced are what they call the source, and the cells where food ends up for production, for growth and development, is what they call the sink. So we have the source and the sink, the starting line and the finish line. Now, the source are usually found on a leaf. So when glucose are being produced, it needs to combine with another glucose because glucose cannot be transported to the phloem. And when the glucose successfully combines with another glucose, it forms sucrose. Sucrose are now being transported to the companion cell that are attached to the phloem vessel. These companion cells allows the diffusion of the sucrose towards the sieve tube of the phloem. So from the source, it goes down to the sink. But before going to the sink, it goes to the companion cell, then it diffuses towards the sink. And that's the process of how the food and water are being transported from the leaf towards different parts of the plants for growth and development. And this process is what we call translocation. Again, it is the movement of sucrose and amino acids in phloem from regions of production, which is a source, which is usually found on the leaves, to regions of storage or to regions of utilization in respiration or growth, which we call the sink. So that's the end of our discussion. Thank you for listening. Happy New Year.